I think there are two reasons, and they're not directly related to Swords and Wizardry, because I really believe that I can use various versions of D&D with my game. Let me explain a little bit. The first big draw is the wealth of material that is out there for the older versions of D&D. Because I want to use other people's modules. I need this as raw material to feed into my process. And this is very superior to me making modules myself from whole cloth for various reasons.
Right.
Yeah. So I really want.
I've already designed one retro fantasy game which does exactly this myself, called Elves. I completely and thoroughly agree with everything you're saying here. That stuff is a gold mine, particularly the original stuff, which has a weird, quirky, it's somehow, compared to the modern stuff, it is simultaneously more coherent and less responsible. Yes. I don't know why, but it is. It's both of those things. So, I mean, you read a page.
If I read a modern module, that's not going to surprise me. But if I go to some of the older stuff.
Exactly. I mean, I have multiple times. One of the reasons I often cite the Slave Lords, and it's not alone in this, is that you pick up a page out of almost any of those. You pick up a page and you read a room description and you think, well, what's that guy going to say?
Mm-hmm.
They seem to be opinionated. And even the ones who aren't, like the two orc guards, you're like, well, okay, all the orcs are in there like having festivals and, beating the slaves, and, they've got their orc god idol, right? And they're doing their rituals and everything. They seem pretty content in there. Out there by the gate, there's this weird, this vulnerable little outpost where these two guards are sitting there. You read the room description, and it's like, there's cheap beer and cheap mugs. The room is bare. And you're going, and you're looking here, and you're looking at the two orcs, and you're going, these guys are probably kind of pissed off. So it jumps up, if that makes any sense. You read this, and this stuff kind of jumps up at you. Okay. You look at at other parts of these same documents, and they are quite oriented, in many cases, for the major characters to give you an opinion, or to imply them very, very heavily. And I think that's one of the features that's involved, but also sometimes the physical confirmation of it all, either intentionally or not, has odd effects in play, has effects that depend very greatly on people's decisions.
But you really get something to work with. It's not just a set piece combat encounter.
Right. Now, I will say that some of the later ones, which purported to be like this, actually weren't. I think that it is a very painful admission to me to realize, through multiple attempts to play it with multiple games, that Against the Cult of the Reptile God is a hideous railroad.
Okay. And
it's very painful because it doesn't look like one. It looks like you go into the town and anything can happen, and you can talk to anybody, and this and that and the other, and it's a big con. So it's very frustrating to see the difference. That you look at something like Against the Slave Lords, which really is a linear kill fest. And yet it's full of far more emergent role-playing and sudden shifts of alliance and, multiple conflicting agendas and a complete uninterest in how it turns out. I mean, the authors are basically saying, okay, and here's what it all is. Oh, and by the way, fuck you. That's and we're done, right? And so those linear kill fests are actually far richer environments for role-playing in the most consequential sense, not just in the sense of acting out a character, but
if you take those opinionated characters seriously.
Yeah. And if you're the game master, you'd say, oh, these are my characters now. Cool, right? Let's play. you'll have a lot to do. If you do that in some of the later stuff, you won't. You're there. They're much more like Call of Cthulhu or second edition D&D stuff. In fact, these are all the things that feed into those canned and programmed campaign sets for second edition. So yeah. So anyways, I'm working with you on this. Go on. Yeah.
I would not have touched the Slave Lord series because I heard it was so linear. Yeah, and yeah, that's an interesting recommendation.
They're an interesting transition because the tournament versions are actually provided in the publications, but the publications are expanded versions.
Oh, okay.
Right. So the tournament versions are, frankly, perfect for what they are. Competition across multiple tables, trying to do the same thing and competing for who does better. They're perfect for that. But the expansions are, well, they're not what I would call brilliant, but in a sort of clockwork or setting building way. But they are brilliant in just throwing more angles into what's going on. They vary. The first two are particularly good for that. So yeah, what you're looking at is an artifact of taking a tournament module and saying, yeah, but I want to play something. Okay, we're going to do all this to it. Okay, now we can play something.
Okay.
But the something is not a story that is set up for you. The something is the story that you're going to end up with, whoever you are. You know, whatever that will be. There's I hope you're good at killing. If you're going to play those, make sure all of you are good at killing things. So there's not a whole lot of good guys in there. So anyway, but yes, I would check those out just for that purpose. I don't know how useful they would be for what you're doing. In fact, I doubt it, because they are so 70s album cover, you know, in their content. But they definitely have that quality. So, all right. So you're when you're talking about the things, the virtues you want to bring out, I've gone into this in such detail because I'm articulating for myself, hopefully providing any kind of sort of corresponding how I would say it, you know, in your head.
Certainly.
Right. So that's a virtue, but you're saying it's not Swords and Wizardry so much. It's that interest in that older material.
Yeah, that's the first thing, the interest in the older material. And the other thing is that my focus has shifted. I've spent my share of time fixing D&D, house ruling the hell out of it. And I've lost interest in debating whether a longbow should do D6 or D8 damage and things like that. I'm more interested in whether certain procedures are in place at all, like a reaction roll, and not so much in the actual fine details.
Right.
And I think many of these things are not really important to what my game is about. For example, we talked about initiative in our last consulting session. And I certainly have preferences and plans regarding that, but I think it's not important which kind of initiative system you'd be using with my game.
As long as it freaking works, as long as it isn't murky, as long as...
Of course.
Okay, so I hear you on this. Now, on the other hand, when I pick up your game, being told, oh, use whatever with it as long as it works, isn't going to help me. So what will you put in? You might think of it as an optional default, but I'm the one who bought the book and I'm looking at it and it's telling me what to do. So
it depends on the area of the rules. For example, initiative, I don't really care. But for example, subduing or overwhelming, knocking out monsters, that is important because, as I said, if you defeat a monster, it owes you a service, and is practically obliged to do something for you. So taking captives is a big deal. So this is an area where I put down some rules because it's often either left blank in D&D rules in various versions, or not to my taste.
Right, or the to put it somewhat less sympathetically, the rules for that were spitballed in and probably have very little, to do with anybody actually using them at any point.
Yes, certainly.
So
grappling.
right.
That's
quite famous example actually.
Yes.
So now we have this interesting question. I know I said it already, and you've actually kind of skated around it by saying it doesn't really matter. But again, to me, using the rule set, the person actually interacting with it, it does matter.
Okay.
Is there something about Swords and Wizardry as opposed to its cultural equivalents that you can point to as I like this one because it does this, and that's why it works well here, as opposed, unfortunately, to saying this is the most generic and bland and ghoulish one I could find, so therefore I can do what I want?
I have a number of preferences regarding different questions and how they are solved in various versions of D&D, but my options are reduced dramatically because I want to use a German rule set.
Uh-huh.
For the benefit of my players. I have 2 players who would very much like this. Actually, I was aware of only one, but when I announced I'd be using a German version, several others chimed in, and great, finally. Yeah, that leaves me with only 3 options at the moment. There's a German version of Labyrinth Lord. There is the Swords and Wizardry, and I might get at an old bookseller's I think Mensa was translated into German, but I have not been able to find it as a PDF, neither legally or
right, or otherwise.
version or whatever. No luck. I'm basically left with these 2 options, and of these, I prefer Swords and Wizardry for various reasons. But admittedly, it's not the ideal.
Right, but what you just said, prefer it for various reasons. It might be actually kind of nice to highlight those. And I'm not really talking about presentation to others. That would be a secondary effect. I'm talking more in terms of looking at your rule set and sort of okay. One
the
right, go ahead.
For this particular version, there are low ability bonuses. Only they max out at +1. I don't like those high bonuses we get in later
right.
basic.
Plus, if I do this, I get +7. If I add this to it, now I get +9,
yes,
and so on.
Exactly. There's 1-minute combat rounds, which I'd like to try out. For a more abstract version. It's limited to level 7, so we don't get into the problematic high-level spells like Raise Dead, which I wouldn't want to have anyway. So those are some of the reasons I like this. D6 damage,
right?
Also
right. You're creating a very coherent picture. Every one of these things you're saying, I'm sure actually is complementary to one another. Right? These are complementary points. They're not little spot. Oh, hi, I have a preference today. Sort of statements. All of these things are working together very strongly. So, thinking of that as a complex of things, okay, hold that kind of in a box. A while ago, a fellow named Ivan talked about what he thought of as the homunculus of D&D, by which he was referring to the neural, the neural model, right, of the proportionate being based on the number of nerve endings, its big feet, and its big nose, or whatever. You know what I'm talking about, these weird images. And he said that when he and a bunch of other people who felt very committed to old D&D got together and talked, they were a little horrified at the homunculi that everybody seemed to have brought.
I can imagine.
You were thinking, okay, well, I play D&D right. I understand it. So, there are some necessary adjustments, but it's what Gygax would have wanted. So this is proper. This is the being. It is now properly proportioned. Look at its beautiful dimensions. And then this other guy shows up and says, "Yeah, I love old D&D too." And you're like, "Oh, cool, another person they love old D&D." Oh my God, what is with those big fucking feet? you know, it's,
Absolutely.
and so the idea here is that the beauty of your homunculus
Mm-hmm.
is something to cherish as you continue to design and actually to bake into the procedures of how we get started and how we continue to do the things.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? I mean, I guess this terrible. I've never thought about this, but I now have this terrible idea of a cartoon, right? That shows, a stereotypical old school gamer. But this is the old school gamer that I like because they are cradling in their arms their homunculus.
Yes,
And they're
yes,
like,
yes.
"This is my homunculus." And I'm like, "You rock. I like you." right? You know what you've got there. And I think that's kind of what I wanted to talk about for the first half of this consult was, do you know your homunculus and what it does, what it's for, particularly. And I was worried because you're repurposing your homunculus through Swords and Wizardry to the Nibelungs. See what I mean?
Yes.
You see where I'm worried that something gets kind of lost, or you're bringing in something that isn't where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
That's
I
it,
think
it
at the
seems like you're in
start,
good shape, but that was my concern. Right.
yes, and I think I started out with some a problematic foundation that I think at the beginning, a part of the motivation of using Swords and Wizardry was, in a sense, to hide behind a kind of authority, saying, okay, we're using this as written, so we don't have any discussions and so on. But this is, of course, an illusion. There are blanks in there, and even if we fill them, we still have to stand behind what what we're doing,
Right.
and
You
that's not a.
know, I'm sure you know what I would do to the claim of, "Oh, well, we're doing this because that way we have this." I would like, "Where is my spiked club?"
Yes.
right. So, so yes, that. It seems like the degree you've kind of gone through that process and you've decided not to hide anymore.
Yes.
That's what I really wanted to bring forward here, was to, if at the very least, cheerlead for that and to say, yes, your homunculus is going to look quite grotesque to some. And that is
Yes.
okay, because theirs
Myself.
is just as weird. At least yours doesn't have those big thumbs. What the hell are those doing there? Right. So, he's like, "It's all about the thumbs. I mean, come on, you can't play. I mean, what are you going to do without those?" So now let's move to something that you can talk to me about. If
Mhm.
we're playing, and I really want to get, we talked a little bit about sort of being in the thick of play and the kind of damage and things that can happen,
Yes.
but I really would like to focus on this business of subdual services.
Yes.
Subdual is one thing. It means you defeat someone without killing them, basically.
Yes.
And then there's the business about prisoners, and then there's the business about service. I mean, if you put someone into service, they volunteer for service as part of having been defeated, they're not really a prisoner anymore.
Mhm.
So I'm curious about, let's take some of those dwarfs, right? Some of those dwarven miners, right? And we all know that we're dealing with, gnomes of the earth. We are not dealing with short people with beards. I mean,
Mhm.
they may look like short people with beards, but they're mythic dwarfs. They're
Yes.
so the sadly the dispute has occurred, but for whatever reason, how am I going to subdue that one dwarf who never really was an asshole among all those dwarves? Right? When the violence started, this particular dwarf, the GM role plays this dwarf as, "Oh man, do we have to?" And it's kind of in there fighting
Yeah.
because, but really isn't, has not pressed the attack, and was kind of liking what you guys were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
But there you are, face to face. The dwarf's kind of like, "Sorry, here I come." And
Yes.
talk to me about subduing this dwarf. I like. I'm good with. I'm If I got to kill him, I do. But what are the choices here? What are my? No, what are the procedures? That's the word.
You might have some magical options like sleep and charm, which are of course limited and valuable resources. You might just get lucky because by definition, if you get to exactly 0 hit points, you're knocked out. But if you're negative, then you're dead. Yeah. So with 1d6 weapon damage for everything,
there's a little bit more safety there, but not much.
Yes,
but not much.
Not much.
But are you saying there's no particular like I attempt to subdue?
That's also, you can do that. Then you take a hefty attack penalty, and the worst you can do is reduce to 0 and knock out.